Great, thank you, Esther. Hello, everyone. It's a real pleasure to be here today. I hope everybody is safe and getting along well given these challenging times I'm sure most of you are also experiencing given where we're at in the world today. But as was noted, I am a program manager here at EPA at our headquarters office, and I have been at EPA for about 15 years. And prior to that, I worked in the solar industry for a small design and build firm that focused on solar energy technologies, both for electric as well as thermal applications. Since coming to EPA about 15 years ago, I have managed or worked on a number of different programs that are focused on energy supply. And so today's presentation is going to pertain mostly to one of those programs, focusing on green power. And we've tried to customize this a little bit for the intended audience, which I understand most of you to be are small businesses and congregations. So looking forward to get starting. So a little bit first about the Green Power Program. Partnership. EPA's Green Power Partnership was launched in 2001. It's a sister program to Energy Star and is located in the same silo here in our agency in the Office of Air and Radiation, and we're one of many voluntary programs that EPA administers in sort of the government-private partnership exchange that we focus on. We work with a wide range of different organizations, ranging from Fortune 500 corporations, higher education institutions, as well as federal, state, and local governments and agencies, and quite a few small and medium-sized businesses and nonprofits. We're essentially focused on getting organizations to switch from conventional sources of electricity over to green power or renewable electricity sources. And there's a number of activities that we undertake with our partners in capacity building, as well as we set some performance benchmarks, which we will investigate right now. This is the crux of our program, the Green Power Partnership. It's essentially focused on setting a minimum electricity use requirement for our partners as a percentage of the partner's total annual electricity use. So as you can see here on the right-hand side of the column, there's a range of percentages, and to the left of those percentages are the corresponding annual electricity use sort of ranges that partners would slot into. Partners can join at a facility level or up to organization-wide, and you just simply apply the electricity use and minimum requirements to either the facility or the organization-wide partnership level that you wish to join. There's a number of other partnership program requirements that are also at play here, and I encourage you to download our program requirements document, which is linked below to learn more about those particular requirements. So let's start a little bit about what green power is. Green power is a subset of renewable electricity, and it's viewed within the voluntary market as a set of resources and technologies that provide the highest environmental benefit. So while renewable electricity is representative of a broader set of resources and technologies, what we're talking about when we talk about green power is generation that comes from those that offer consumers essentially a higher environmental profile. The usual suspects of wind, solar, geothermal, some forms of biomass, biogas, as well as low-impact hydropower are all inclusive of within the green power sort of definition in the market. Green power is also representative of voluntary action in many ways, because green power is driven by consumer preference rather than policy mandate. It is essentially representing actions taken by voluntary customers that go above and beyond what is otherwise mandated or available in the marketplace. Also, green power is, like any renewable electricity, is substantiated through market instruments called renewable energy certificates, which we'll talk more about here in a moment, and is essentially the way that companies can also reduce their carbon footprint. So when it comes to consumers in the market, one of the things that most consumers want to do is make a difference through their investments in renewable electricity and green power. And the way that manifests itself in the market, first and foremost, is just by simply making a choice to switch from conventional sources over to renewable or green power sources. That simple choice is emblematic of an impact that wouldn't otherwise occur had you not made that choice. So this is the first place most customers need to start out, is just simply focusing on your alternatives for how your power is generated and making choices based on your preferences. As I mentioned, green power it has a voluntary definition to it, or implication to it, that means that when you make an investment in green power, that represents an amount of renewable electricity on the grid that wouldn't have otherwise been there as a result of your action. And so essentially green power separates itself from any other generation that would be counted under a mandate, and many states have mandates such as renewable portfolio standards that ultimately define how much renewable electricity consumers of all types receive through the grid mix. But the green power investments from a voluntary perspective go above and beyond that. We call that surplus to regulation in the industry, and so this is one thing you would want to ensure when you look at your different supply options, that you are essentially contributing to something that otherwise wouldn't have occurred in order to make a difference. We also look and recommend that third-party certified green power be purchased by consumers when possible. Third-party certification ensures that the retail products that you buy meet national standards for resource eligibility, and also have some other elements in the retail market to ensure that what you're buying has that regulatory surplus requirement, as well as verification that the supply contracts that back the supplier's marketing claims of what they're selling to you are actually substantiated by generation that's been produced on your behalf. Another way to make a difference in the market, and one that's useful to think about, is committing to green power in a long-term sense. Many of the supply options we're going to talk about a little later are dependent on sort of commitments that become financeable for the developers of projects and other sources of green power that ultimately contribute to evolving the marketplace towards a cleaner grid. And so your willingness to commit long-term helps developers of projects obtain long-term or financing for their projects based on that long-term commitment that you offer. So contracts and the term at which you are entering into is a primary driver for driving the market and changing our electricity grid. Also, the fact of just engaging with directly with new projects is also an important way to change the market. It is also, as we'll learn here in a little bit, the singular way that you can also access economic benefits associated with renewable energy. We'll talk more about that here in a sec. And then, of course, making a difference. You know, a lot of what people do as a result of buying green power and using it is they want to be able to say something about that to their constituents, to their customers, to their congregations. And so being able to substantiate that use and the claims that you're making requires that you own essentially the market instruments that are associated with that. So just turning a little bit to the bigger picture is what role does the voluntary consumer play in our broader renewable electricity or electricity markets? And looking at this, this graphic here, you can see that the voluntary consumer contribution to renewable electricity in the market is quite substantial, and it's increasingly becoming a prime driver in the market for bringing in new capacity and new renewables. Many of you have probably heard of the large companies and other institutions who are entering into very large and long-term project deals. Some of those have entered into consumer marketing and other areas where people hear about these deals. And those deals are emblematic of the voluntary actions that those companies are taking. Now, the compliance markets are essentially representative of those state mandates that states are creating for utilities that serve all ratepayers. They set mandates for how much electricity those utilities must serve their consumers with. And then this other renewables category is representative of things like the economic investments that some utilities and others are making that are not, they're on the supplier side, so the utility side, but they're doing it because technology costs and the cost of renewable electricity is increasingly decreasing over time and becoming essentially in many parts of the country the least cost resource that utilities can access to supply their customers. And so it's through these different levers in the market that we're seeing this transformational change occur towards a cleaner, decarbonized electricity sector. So I think right now we're going to undertake another poll. And so if we could take a minute and look over into the right-hand side of your screen, there should be a poll opportunity where you can answer the current poll question. What we're asking you right now is, have you undertaken any significant energy efficiency upgrades? And I know we're talking about green power today, but what's interesting in our sort of carbon footprint world that we live in and operate in is that energy efficiency and green power work together in many ways to reduce our air emissions and our carbon footprint. And so let's see, let's go ahead and take a look at the answers. We'll go ahead and close the poll and see where we are and see if people have undertaken any of these activities. This gives us a good idea of what some of the things you may have been working on already in your building or your business.
All right, the poll is just closing now, so I'll go ahead and share the results with everybody.
Great. Okay, so it looks like a lot of people have worked on lighting, as well as some building envelope, HVAC, heating and cooling loads. A few others that haven't done anything yet, which is okay. There's lots of opportunities through the Energy Star program to learn more about these types of activities you can undertake. But ultimately, you know, your air emissions, your contribution to air pollution and air emissions, as well as carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, is a function of how much energy you use, as well as the emissions that energy creates in its generation. And so from an electricity sector basis, you can participate in programs like Energy Star to reduce how much energy you use. But in contrast, you can also participate in the Green Power Partnership as a mechanism to change the emissions rate of that power that you're using for your operations. And so Energy Star and the Green Power Partnership work together in this fashion of fuel switching and reducing the total amount of energy that you use to ultimately result in better environmental performance for you in your home as well as your organization. So let's move into the range of supply options that are available for consumers in today's market. We, in the Green Power Partnership, break these up into two different types of product or kind of supply option categories. One is retail options, the other is project-specific options. Interestingly, the retail options are more common. They've been around longer in many cases. It's only been more recently that the project-specific options, where consumers can engage directly with projects, have come into the market. And some of these are more recent supply option innovation categories, whereas others have been around since the late 90s, when the voluntary market essentially came into being. If you look at these options and essentially evaluate them based on what they would cost you relative to what you currently pay for your electricity, you see a couple of them rise above the line there, and most of them fall below. Retail options that cost you more, like renewable energy certificates or unbundled RECs, as well as many utility products and program offerings, it's generally the design of these programs that create a slightly incremental cost to the renewable energy that you receive. In the case of unbundled RECs, this is a product that is sold to you separately from the underlying electricity, so you ultimately get two billings from different suppliers of the renewable energy certificates, which we will talk about in a moment here as to what those are and what they represent. Utility programs also provide essentially a competing product offering relative to their conventional products, but they also layer on the cost of administering the programs. In some cases, the products that they offer are not always designed in a way to pass through the entirety of the renewable electricity cost savings. And so in some cases, these types of products will cost you more. However, when you do get into some of these other options that are below the line, this is where your organization can start to explore the opportunity of actually paying less for your electricity. And there's some nuance in here, but we'll talk about that here in a moment. For today, we're going to actually not address each and every one of these product options. Given that the audience today is largely smaller organizations, congregations, we're going to eliminate the community choice aggregation as well as the financial contracts from our discussion of the day. While community choice aggregation is an emerging supply option, it's one that consumers actually don't have a tremendous amount of say over whether they receive renewable electricity through this option. Community choice aggregation is a pathway by which states authorize communities to essentially procure electricity supply on behalf of their community that they represent. And as a consequence of that, many communities are choosing renewable electricity options. These programs are designed as an opt-out, so you are by default going to receive what the community choice aggregation buys on your behalf, and you would have to proactively opt out. However, you don't have a lot of choice over what that community choice aggregation provides you. So increasingly it's renewables, but from a consumer perspective, the supplier, the community choice aggregator, is doing most of the work on your behalf, and it's really kind of less of a proactive choice on your part. Contrast that with financial contracts, which we also won't be talking about today. Financial contracts are a very complex type of agreement. They're also known as virtual power purchase agreements and contracts for differences. There's a number of terms that this sort of captures, but these are actually not power delivery contracts, even though the virtual power purchase agreement might suggest so. These are actually a financial type of contract that is common in the market that a lot of larger corporates are using as a method for directly engaging with large projects. It requires a certain amount of electricity consumption or support that you're willing to provide to the project, and it isn't going to be well suited for a smaller buyer. So before we dive into each of these individual supply options that we'll talk about today, EPA did an analysis recently about on the topic of consumer access. And so while there's all these different supply options, they're not available everywhere and to every type of consumer. So what we did in this analysis is we looked at all the different supply options in the market. We looked at policies in different states, as well as the different utility sub-territories as to what kinds of supply options customers in those utilities would have based on the market and policy environment. And with some assumptions, we were able to calculate essentially the amount of access either in terms of the total number of customers, and customers in this case are defined as essentially utility accounts as opposed to individuals. So these are the number of utility accounts in certain areas in different states, and also the electricity sales that those utility counts represent in their entirety. And what you can see here, and I think the point that I'm trying to make for you today on this slide is that while you are going to start exploring the different green power options that are available to you, you're going to quickly find out that some of these are just not going to be available to you as a consumer. And so you're going to have to determine that based on where you live, what kind of products are available, and we're going to talk a little bit about the process that you go through that. But ultimately, one of the things that I think is also worth inferring here is that all of these product and supply options that are listed here include or deliver to you as a consumer a legal claim to the renewable electricity by way of providing you the renewable energy attributes or the renewable energy certificate that convey those attributes in the market. And that's, I think, a useful point for us to sort of talk a little bit before we dive into our first product category here is how is renewable electricity actually conveyed across a shared grid here in the United States? If you take a moment and think about the plug in your wall and the electricity that flows out of that plug into perhaps your computer or to charge your cell phone or run your business, there's no possible way to understand where that power originated from. The electrons that flow, so to speak, through the electric grid are undifferentiated. They all look the same. There's not little green ones and little brown ones. They're all, it's undifferentiated power. And so the power itself and the flow of power is impossible to direct from points of generation to points of consumption. And so here in the U.S., like in many countries around the world who are developing their own renewable energy and electricity markets, we've had to create a parallel system in order to track, allocate, and provide ownership to renewable electricity. And we do that through an instrument called the Renewable Energy Certificate. And those certificates play two roles. They play a role as a market instrument here in the U.S., but they also can be sold as a product, a standalone retail product. And so as we go through all of these different supply options, the one thing I want you to understand is that all of them involve the renewable energy attributes that are conveyed through renewable energy certificates, the market instrument. And so depending on the supply option or product offering that you may engage with, ultimately what you're seeking to do in order to lay claim to a certain part of the grid's renewable electricity is to be able to have a renewable energy certificate that designates that claim and ownership to the demand that you create has been served by a generator on the grid that produced power for your benefit. So the first category here we're going to dive into is the retail unbundled renewable energy certificate. And this is the most widely available option. It's available to all consumers regardless of where you live in the U.S. It's the only product option that can say that. It is essentially consumers can go out to suppliers of these retail renewable energy certificates and essentially buy them separate from where the supplier of where they get their physical power. They can then associate these renewable energy certificates with the power they use and make a credible claim that the demand that they have created for electricity was served by the renewable source that produced renewable electricity somewhere on the grid. So this is a way to get around the constraints of the utility grid and essentially move towards buying and supporting renewable electricity. As I mentioned, these are available to all types of customers. You can buy it on a month-to-month. It can also be more long-term commitments. This is the key element here is that this is going to be a separate billing from your electricity supplier. And so by nature of that, you're going to pay more than you would pay for your normal electricity product. The cost ranges quite significantly, but just to give you a baseline, you can expect about maybe 1.5 cents per kilowatt hour. To give you an idea of what that costs, it's about $160 or so a year for an average American home that uses about 11,000 kilowatt hours per year. There's not a lot of price stability for RECs because it depends a little bit on what your underlying electricity cost is doing. So it's hard to get a stable price for your total REC plus electricity, but the REC portion alone can often be a fixed cost over the term of that contract. The nice thing about renewable energy certificates is you can customize these procurements in almost any way possible, including what kinds of resources, where they're located, you name it. And with each of those kinds of customizations, the price point will change a little bit depending on the supply availability in the market for the RECs. Ultimately, many REC marketers who sell renewable energy certificates do so through a process by which they buy them and then they retire them in REC tracking systems that cover the entire of the U.S. on your behalf. And so you don't actually receive the REC. It's not something it's more of a digital representation that the grid operators use to represent renewable electricity and allocate it to different consumers. But just so you know, when you buy RECs, there is somebody who is going to be hopefully retiring those RECs on your behalf so that you can have a clear ownership claim to that REC that you purchased. How do you find these products? The third-party certification is something that EPA recommends. As I mentioned earlier, it ensures that what you're buying meets national standards for green power, as well as they do verification of supply contracts of suppliers who offer these retail products. There's only one certifier here in the U.S., and it's the Green E program, which is a program administered by the Center for Resource Solutions. And they have a supplier and product finder on their website that you can use. So moving to our second category, utility green power supply or products and programs. This is going to depend a little bit on where you live as to what's going to be available and what these products will look like. Here in the U.S., we have a number of states that have gone through deregulatory processes to essentially make their retail electricity markets competitive. And in contrast, there are some states that haven't gone through those processes to deregulate their markets, and so they're considered traditional regulated markets. Utilities that offer green power options in these two different types of state markets deliver those in slightly different ways. In the case of the green pricing products in the upper left-hand corner, this is a utility that you currently would pay your electricity bill to. Many of them will offer a green power product option or program. You would just simply have to subscribe to that program in order to receive renewable electricity, and they would buy renewable energy certificates from projects that they sometimes own and operate themselves, and they would retire them on your behalf as a subscriber to that program. Alternatively, in states that have green marketing products where you get to choose who actually generates your power, which may be different than the utility that delivers it, you would have to go out and do some research across those markets in order to determine which supplier in that competitive environment you wish to buy your renewable electricity from, and they would essentially offer products and generate it, and then it would be billed to you on a single bill. To give you a sense based on where you may be located of which states have competitive electricity markets, the ones that are not colored gray here all have some component of competitive electricity options. I would say focusing on the light blue are probably the place you would want to focus on. The ones with the black hash lines are states that have some restrictions on the access to the competitive market. For the example, in Montana, they've actually suspended their competitive process or access for consumers unless you are already participating in that market. California also suspended their deregulatory process, and so it's not, there's some lingering competitive options, but some of those are not available to new customers, so to speak. So from this perspective, you're generally looking at green marketing products in the light blue, and in most other states, you would be both the gray and the blue hash. You'd be looking at green pricing products if they exist. You can look at the Greenie website as a place to find these products. They are often sold in blocks in terms of blocks of kilowatt hours, so maybe a certain number of like 100 kilowatt hours would be a single block, and you can buy as many blocks as you need to cover your electricity use. Other programs sell it on a percentage basis. As I mentioned, you would be paying through your single electricity bill, so the renewable energy would be delivered to you through one biller arrangement. Again, the costs go up from about a penny and a half per kilowatt hour and can vary quite widely, so you need to check on the cost competitiveness of this product option. Many of these products don't offer much price stability. Some of the market volatility in terms of pricing gets passed through to customers, such as fuel charges and things like that, so you need to check on that element. And then again, the REC treatment, all of these programs generally will be retiring the RECs on your behalf, so that you can substantiate your renewable electricity use. So let's move over to the next one, which is we're starting to get into the project engagement supply options. Here we have self-supply, which is essentially an arrangement where as a consumer, particularly if you own your own building, and this is why we asked that initial poll question, this can be a little more difficult if you're a tenant in a building that you don't own, but you would essentially be installing a project on your building and serving your demand through an investment that you make in a renewable energy project. This kind of supply option is obviously a longer-term commitment. You're essentially building a project that's going to last for probably upwards of 20+ years. The cost will vary by the type of technology that you engage with, how big the project will be, the market environment in which you're installing the project. So there's a lot of moving parts to assessing cost in this respect. I would recommend taking a look at the Energy Sage website that's linked here. This is a DOE-supported website that allows for the comparison of bids, and also there's some transparency in how much different projects, perhaps in your local area, cost for other customers who participated in this Energy Sage marketplace. So this is an interesting website to check out to find about different product options and how much it might cost. The nice thing about self-supply is that you're buying a project that's going to provide you a known fixed cost for your electricity over the life of the project. So you will know from day one exactly how much your electricity is going to cost for the next 20 years. That certainty can be very useful in some business context. If you're moving a cost from a variable price or cost over to a fixed cost on your balance sheet, that can have value unto itself. Also, generally, we're talking about solar as it applies to most building integrated projects. Obviously, there's some opportunities here for maybe some small wind, but by and large, most of this is solar project focused. Most states give the owner of a renewable generator the ownership of all the energy attributes or RECs generated by the project. So by developing such a project, you will essentially have ownership to your RECs. Self-supply is often driven by state policies called net metering rules. This is a policy that has to do with your ability as a consumer to cost recover for the power you generate that ultimately you do not use on site but export to the grid. So the physical electricity that you may be generating may be flowing out onto the grid, and these policies ensure that you get financial credit for that. So net metering rules are one of the key drivers for self-supply, and so this gives you a sense of what states have developed net metering rules, which ones don't have as robust. Some states are actually moving away from net metering into value of solar tariffs, which are slightly different animals altogether, but serve a similar purpose. But this gives you a sense of where you might find opportunities for this type of project or supply option. Some key drivers: you have to have a site for a project, lease spaces. There's an issue called split incentives where the building owner might not have as much incentive to develop a project on the building because they're not the ones that are using the electricity in the building. It's you as the tenant. So they call that the split incentive barrier. Is also the long-term commitment. You're looking at a 20-year commitment, although you can sell a building with a solar array to a new buyer of the building and increase the value of that building in that sale as a result of having a solar array. So it is possible to convey some of that investment to another party. The incumbent cost of electricity is probably one of the single largest drivers of whether your self-supply project will be viable or not. I think in this case, you're also having to consider the upfront capital cost of the project. So you're going to have to come up with the internal financing sources. That's usually through cash or loan arrangements. I mentioned the net metering rules as being another driver. Permitting costs and processes can be a real barrier in some markets. Traditionally, a lot of permitting agencies have determined the cost of the permit based on the value of the project that's being permitted. Solar is an expensive but very fast, quickly deployable type of technology. If you were to build an extension onto your building for $30,000, it might take you a number of weeks to do that, and permitting departments would charge you an exorbitant permitting cost to achieve that. You can put a $30,000 solar array on your building and have it installed in a couple days. So there's been a lot of effort to try to inform planning departments and permitting departments on how to better adjust their permitting costs to serve on-site renewable energy development. Interconnection procedures, this is the safety policies of actually attaching a system to a shared grid. This can be at state level or even at the utility level. These can also be challenging for getting projects developed. EPA recommends working and seeking project developers that are NABCEP certified. NABCEP stands for the National Association of Building Certified Energy Professionals, I believe. And they certify both design and installations professionals. It's good to make sure you're working with a NABCEP certified professional to make sure your project's being designed properly for your core objectives. Again, you can look at the Energy Sage website to get more information on all of these options. Power purchase agreements is something that came into the market around 2006 or 5, thereabouts. So it's been around for quite a while. This is an arrangement where instead of investing in a system that you own and operate, what you're doing is entering into a contractual agreement with a third party who will design, develop, own, and operate a project on your building, and you are simply contracting for the procurement of the output of that project. And so a solar services provider will come to the table and have equipment manufacturers, installers, investors all behind them ready to build a project for you, and all you're going to do is sign a contract for the kilowatt hours and perhaps the renewable energy certificates that project produces over its life. This is hugely beneficial and was a huge innovation in the market because it took the performance risk off of you as the consumer. You don't have to worry about owning and operating the project and whether it produces. You're only going to buy what the project produces, and also it sort of deals with a number of other barriers of not having to worry about some of the permitting and other interconnection processes that are generally taken care of by the solar services provider. Power purchase agreements are often or have to be often authorized at the state level. So here's a map that might show you, based on where you're located, where this might be a possibility. There's a number of the darker colored states here that have actually disallowed third-party arrangements, so it'd be more difficult to consider this as a supply option. The lighter blue states have authorized it, and then the white states have not really had a decision yet on, there's no policy decision on whether third-party arrangements are allowable yet. But increasingly, this is how many projects are being developed in the market. And power purchase agreements don't have to be signed for on-site projects. You can also, in some competitive markets, also reach to off-site projects and sign power purchase agreements with projects that are not located at your facility. This power purchase agreement is, as I mentioned, dependent on state policy. It's a long-term commitment. However, there are contractual elements that allow you to opt out or buy back the project from the developer, meaning you can, once it's depreciated and the investors have their return on investment, they often sell it back to the host of the project at a fraction of the cost of what the project originally cost. There's no billing arrangement per se, except for the payments to the developer for the power that the project delivers. The costs can vary. It just depends on how the contract is set. Sometimes these are fixed cost contracts. Some of them have escalator rates or are indexed to current electricity costs. So there's a lot of ways these contracts can be structured. And sometimes they offer an identifiable cost savings in later years, but not so much in the early years of the project. So there may be a time frame in which you won't actually realize the cost savings from the project. These are generally solar, although off-site can vary with different technologies such as wind. You must, in these contracts, ensure that you're contractually receiving the RECs if you want to be receiving renewable electricity. Again, I would recommend working with NABCEP certified, and Energy Sage, again, could also be another avenue for exploring PPA opportunities. Shared renewables is a relatively newer supply option. A number of states have authorized community solar policies that essentially allow a customer to engage with a project, a much larger project than they need by themselves, but they go in as a single consumer amongst many into a community project, and they can either own a certain capacity of the project, so a certain amount of generation capacity, or they can also be structured to provide a certain amount of the percentage output of the project itself to each participating consumer or sponsor of the project. So this is available in a number of states. Here, once again, you can see that the orange states are where active community solar policies, enabling policies are available. There's a number of states that have active campaigns. Most of these enabling policies affect investor-owned utilities, which cover most consumers in the U.S. But if you look at this map, you can see that where a lot of community solar projects exist aren't in states that actually have authorizing policies, and that's because in many states, municipal-owned utilities or rural electric co-ops have a little more flexibility in sort of determining the programs and product offerings that they offer that investor-owned utilities in these states don't have. And so we have seen quite a number of community solar projects pop up in parts of the country in the muni and investor-owned utility spaces. So these are, different types of considerations, much like the other supply options. I think the one I'll point out to you is that very few community solar projects actually convey the RECs to their project customers. So if you want to be able to substantiate your renewable electricity use, you'll want to perhaps look into that particular element of the community solar project option, and also, maybe consider another supply option if getting renewable electricity is your key objective. Utility green tariffs is our last option. This is something that's very much a new innovation in the market. A number of states and utilities are starting to offer these. They are generally Public Utility Commission authorized. They can vary depending on, from terms of customer type, based on the rate that you pay or how big you are in terms of a customer in the sort of utility territory. These range in cases from month-to-month tariffs to long-term tariffs. They're generally on-bill sort of charges where they net out the typical electricity rate that you pay and replace it with a new tariff rate. These vary around the country in many ways, but most of them offer some sort of competitive cost benefit to the customer, and they're generally fixed, known electricity prices that you'll receive, and the RECs in most cases are conveyed to the customer. I think you generally will have to check with your utilities to know whether this would be available. Here's another map that shows where there are active green tariffs. There's some states that have new deals or new tariffs available, but no deals have been developed through those tariff structures. There's also a number of states for really large corporates that have done one-off deals for single customers like the Walmarts of the world, but those are obviously not applicable in this case. This slide I included just simply to give you a sense of some of the names of the utilities down below. Once you have a chance to maybe look at this slide deck in the future a little closer, you can start to see some of the utility names that offer these tariffs in the different states. Xcel Energy in Colorado, Georgia Power in Georgia, Duke Energy, North Carolina, and so forth. This is just to give you a sense of where some of these active deals are being made and some of the progress in developing new capacity in the market. And last, here's an example of just some of the variability that the tariffs offer in the market. Here's 3 utility tariffs compared next to each other on a number of these different criteria. Again, month-to-month, long-term commitments, almost all of them offer RECs. The bottom line here is you have to look at the tariff specifically to understand whether this will work for you as a consumer. So a few resources just to finish up. If you're just getting started, EPA's Green Power Partnership has a guide to purchasing green power. This is a great place to start. We also recommend buying third-party certified retail products, and here's some additional information on where to find out. We mentioned this already. And then last, if you're looking at directly engaging with projects, developing projects, contracting for projects, EPA has a toolbox with a lot of different resources, and I recommend checking this resource out. It has all sorts of different ways to sort of look at different challenges you might encounter and find resources to help you figure the solutions. And then my last slide here is just simply to remind you that you're not actually using renewable electricity unless you have both a REC and the electricity together. And so whatever you do as you move through time, just keep in mind you need to own the REC. And suppliers should not be selling you renewable energy without giving you the REC either. That's also considered a consumer deception issue. So I think now we're going to move over to some questions.